heard that, and he had been thrown out of the unit just before I got there, that he had passed the phone to Puffy in a jail cell so that he could call an attorney. So, and you know, I'd love to speak to Derrick Parker about it one day, but that was the rumor I heard, and I just saw there was a newspaper article the other day where he's talking about the incident, which he really had nothing to do other than show up the first night.
Okay, I want to follow up on something that I'm sure you know who Bill Courtney is.
Yes, I know who he is.
Yeah, I've had him on my platform. Been a gentleman to me on my platform. He's welcome. But he has his own podcast, and I know he did it his last or one of his latest episodes. He had two detectives on,
Right.
and I think I have their names 1 second. But these two detectives were involved in the Shine and Diddy shooting back in '99 at Club New York, and your name was mentioned.
Right.
It was thrown around by Bill and others. Bill had said you got kicked out of the unit because you had passed the phone to Puffy in a jail cell, and that was a rumor that you had heard.
That's an incorrect and a false rumor.
How so?
Okay, Puffy was in the cell that day when he got arrested. No one passed him a phone. He had legal counsel already, so how could he get past the phone? He had a lawyer. So the stuff that you're hearing from people are just jealousy because these people just make up lies. And then the shame of it is they go on a podcast and tell these lies, which are so stupid. Now, some of the stuff that they put out there, that they said, what else did they say about me? Did he say I bodyguarded Jay-Z or something?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Hold on. He also said you had nothing to do with the incident other than that you showed up at the first night.
Okay. I showed up because the chief asked me to show up. He wanted me there to be there. If this case didn't happen in the precinct, these guys would have never had this case. They knew very little about the hip hop industry. This was the biggest case of their careers that they got involved with. And you know, like I said, when you go back to things like this with people, they tend to want to embellish and make up things and say things because, you know, I would never go and say something that's not true.
Right.
You know, I think I say when you and I have spoken in the past about things about me or anybody else, I always try to be as truthful as I can. Even if something I did was something that I did, I would just explain it to you and tell you why I did it. But I wouldn't go on in a podcast and lie or make up things. You know, I wouldn't do that. That's bad because then you go and you slander someone and you say things about them that are not true.
Right.
And I would never do that because that'll come back to haunt you later.
Right. The detective said, one of the detectives, well, do you know this guy, Joe Sweetie?
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. Never even talked to him that night in the precinct, so I don't even know where this guy came from.
You know, again, I heard that rumor as well. We had a kind of a challenging relationship with him throughout the course of the case. I believe he was the one that gave us the nickname Scar, although I'm not completely sure about that. But I think that's how we first found out that the person that got into the altercation with Puffy was this guy Scar, because we were interviewing people trying to figure out how this thing started, collect witnesses, and that was, I think he was pivotal in giving us that name. That much I will say. But after that, he was he would always tell us where Scar was, like the night before.
He says that they had a challenging relationship with you.
They did.
How so?
Now, it wasn't Sweetie, but it was Cadigan. I think he mentioned Cadigan, correct?
Okay, yeah, he was on the other guy in the show.
Now, I know who Artie Cadigan was. He was one of the case detectives that had the case.
Right.
He was in the Midtown South precinct. So when the shooting happened, it occurred in his precinct. He's a precinct detective that works upstairs in the precinct in the detective squad. Whenever a case comes into that jurisdiction, he was the catching detective that caught that case.
Right.
You follow me?
Yeah.
All right. So I know who he is. The only challenge that we had with him is that I had a partner that day, and Cadigan and his partner were very rude to him. As a matter of fact, they treated him very badly when he came in because they questioned his background as a detective. He had more of a narcotic background, and they were kind of like, They was kind of like stepping to him, asking him about his, his investigative experience.
Was he black or white? Your
He was black.
Go ahead.
So my partner at the time felt it was more racially motivated, the way they treated him. Yes, it was. He felt that.
Right.
Now, I talked to Cadigan that day and his partner, but it was a guy named Nardi, from what I remember, not this guy Sweeney. I never heard of him.
Right.
And when I was in the precinct with them, they challenged me as well.
Okay.
And they asked me about my experience. And then I said to both of them that I have more experience than both you guys put together. And as a matter of fact, I solved more murders than those guys solved in their whole entire lifetime. And that I do know, because they did say to me, and this is why I always say about the truth. When I told them where I went, because remember, detectives know one another. Right. They know where you come from and what you've been and what you've done. I worked in several precincts that these guys have never worked in. Believe me, I paid my dues big time. So I know about investigations. I've done a lot of them. I solved a lot of murders and I locked up a lot of people for murder, you know? So when it comes to me coming into a squad with them and talking to them, they tried to belittle me as well, but they couldn't, because when I told them my investigative experience and where I worked, they couldn't challenge me on that because they didn't have my experience at the time. And this I will say. So they did belittle my partner, because since they brought it up on this podcast, they did belittle him. And he felt, because he had a narcotic background, that they were just singling him out because he was a black guy. He looked young, and he did look young. And I think one of the detectives in the squad too asked me, Derrick, who's your perp? They made something like that, who's your perp? And he got really offended by that, because we were up there working, trying to help them. You know, listen, when I went to a lot of these cases, the chief of detectives and the chief of department and the police commissioner called me direct on my cell phone and told me to go to these places. Derrick, you have to be there, you know? As a matter of fact, I told you, when I first went to the precinct, Cadigan was not even there. He came in the next morning, because the night of, I was at home in bed and they called me and told me to go to the Hot 97, to the Club New York shooting. And that's why I went, because all the lawyers were there and they all applauded me, not because they wanted to see their clients, and the chief wouldn't let them, because believe me, it was a big case. So they had to go through a lot of protocol. And they applauded me and said, finally somebody with brains is here. You know, which I didn't think was right either, but they were upset because they couldn't see their clients. And remember, they got high profile clients. And they even warned me when I came in the door, Derrick, you know, counsel's here, so you can't talk to them, which I knew already. You know, so the whole idea in that particular case going back was to separate Diddy and J-Lo until the prosecutor, which is this guy, Matt McDonough, got there, and to let him run the case. That was his job. So we brought everything back to the Midtown South precinct, because when the shooting occurred, J-Lo, Diddy, Wolf, and the driver took off, and they were in the Midtown North precinct, which is above 45th Street on 8th Avenue. Right. Once you cross that area, you're now in the north, not the south, because there's coterminality as far as the precincts are concerned. So they were brought back to the south because the club was in the south. Club New York was in Midtown South. That's where it occurred at. You follow me so far?
Yeah.
All right. So that was the challenging part that I had with those guys.
Wow. Was
It was more of a disrespect, but you know what? I have more thicker skin
right.
to handle things. My partner at the time, he didn't appreciate it, but he walked off, and that's the way that went. But I was really nice to those guys too. To be honest with you, I got them a fax machine. I remember that because they had a fax machine that wasn't working, and I made a phone call to one of my friends in the department, and they got them a fax machine. So those guys, I don't know. They, like I said, people go on these podcasts, and people should vet them better before they come on about what they're going to say about something, and just tell the truth about it. Don't embellish and say, I gave Diddy a cell phone. There were other things they said also, right?
He's
it was
trying
always
to
after the
interject
fact.
himself into the case all the time.
Yeah.
That's what he was about.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cadigan said you always interject yourself.
Well, if interjection means that the chief tells me to go there, the police commissioner, then yes, I interjected myself.
Yeah. They also stated you did some security for Puffy in Vegas or LA.
I don't want to say caught, but he was doing security for Puffy in like Vegas or LA or something, and
Yeah.
well, it wasn't supposed, didn't have approval for his side business and doing
Yeah.
that.
And you didn't have approval, and you got. I guess he was trying to.
Okay, see how the story gets all wishy-washy? How people make things up? What happened in the case at Club New York, so let me clarify this. IAB, which is Internal Affairs Division, had a bulletin of some information that came from a housing bureau that alleged that information was being funneled to Puffy, Diddy. My name was mentioned, Cadigan's name was mentioned, and it was somebody else that I do remember because IAB told me. When I went to IAB and answered those charges, I was cleared of it because I didn't work in the housing bureau and I had no access to the fax machine that the information came from. So that spells out that untruth that somebody just told you about me doing something with Puff. Now, when I was in the intelligence division, I was asked to step aside from Intel because of a sensitive information that was going on. And you gotta remember, Intel is a real sensitive unit. Once you're in something like that and something gets alleged, they have to answer it. And once they have to answer something like that, they do put you on the block to prove yourself that you're innocent, which I did. And as a result of it, IAB cleared me of it. So it wasn't a big deal. I didn't like the fact how it went down because I think it was the prosecutor who alleged that some people were involved. But if he didn't know and you didn't know who it was, you just don't throw names out there. But nevertheless, the IAB guys interviewed me. They said, I was very cool with them. They were like, your records are well above the standards. You haven't been sick. You're a good detective. You're a first grade detective. I don't get it. But they said to me, there's a lot of jealousy on the job. Remember, in the unit that I was in, there were so many people trying to get into the unit I was in. Everybody was calling me, asking me, could they be my partner? Or who do they have to call to get into this unit? But a lot of it was more or less, even when I got into the unit, I remember one of my ex-partners calling me. And he said, Derrick, out of the 40 people that accepted into cold case before I went to Intel, he said, you're the only guy that's worth your weight in gold. A lot of these guys didn't have your experience or some of the stuff that you've done. Right. And they were a little jealous too because they weren't picked to go in these certain units. Listen, I never asked, on the job, whenever I worked, I was always asked to go into a unit. Right. I never put in a request or a transfer or kiss someone's butt, as they say, to get there. I was asked to go there. That's the reason why I was there.
Bill Courtney, to your knowledge, was he part of any sort of a hip-hop task force unit?
No, not to my knowledge. He was in Queens. He's a Queens guy. He's from Queens. And listen, I'm sure he has a background in investigations that he's done cases, federal cases, just like I have. Everything he's done, I've done also. Right. So he's done federal cases and everything else. The only thing is, my scope of employment with the PD at the time was to work on the hip-hop music industry. Right. That's why I was there. My focus was to find out about the violence in this community, why it was done, why rappers were victims and why they were perpetrators, and to answer to certain people on the job when needed to be. Don't get me wrong. I had my ups and downs too with the department when these bosses were calling me, asking me certain things, because remember, the police commissioner doesn't want to call your captain or say, hey, look, what's going on in the case. He wants to hear it from the horse's mouth. He wants to hear it from the guy who he knows that knows about this industry pretty much. So that's why they called me.
Right. I think it was Sweeney or Cadigan, one of them. I think more so Sweeney. He had said that he had bumped into some event into Jay-Z and Beyonce, and then here you are. Here's Derrick bodyguarding for them.
Of a club in Manhattan and ran into Jay-Z. Like, I didn't know him, but
Right.
I almost bumped into them, and people taking pictures and everything. And Beyonce was there too. And then I just turned to go around like the fray and who's working for them there, but Derrick Parker.
Right.
And I don't know if he was off. I can't remember if he was off the job or not. But I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Coincidence,
I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
he's one of them guys. He keeps showing up.
Any truth to that?
Okay, here's another mistruth that this guy spoke. I don't even know where he mixes stuff up. If Jay-Z is probably laughing right now. If he saw this interview, he's probably laughing about how dumb a statement that is. I never ever worked for Jay-Z and never worked for Beyonce, never. Anybody in the music industry will tell you that I was never part of their security entourage or anything. The only time I dealt with Jay-Z is when he got arrested in Midtown North in the car with his bodyguard, Hamza. Big Hamza. And Big Hamza was arrested for having possession of a firearm. As a matter of fact, they were all arrested. But Jay-Z was later let go. And I spoke with Jay-Z, but he didn't want to talk. He didn't say anything. I spoke to him briefly, and he didn't want to talk. He didn't want to say anything. He wanted to wait until he spoke to his lawyer to do anything. But eventually he was let go because I think the bodyguard owned up to having the gun. And, listen, these rappers have it because they have it for protection. They're scared of other people that might want to go out and do harm to them or maybe rob them or set people up. And you remember you're bodyguarding a big client. But as far as me bodyguarding Jay-Z, no. And to make a statement like that is just asinine. That's basically what I can say.
Overall, to end it, what do you think of that whole little piece where they mentioned you? Like, how do you feel any animosity?
You know what? At first I did, but then I looked at the guys that it's coming from, and I laughed because, to go on a podcast and to say things like that, you got to really know what you're talking about. Don't make things up, but don't talk about hearsay. I'm never going to talk to you about everything I'm telling you right now is what I remember and what I know. I'm not telling you about who told me or what happened or this and that. I'm telling you the truth about what happened. I've always been that type of guy. If something happened to me where I did something bad or I got in trouble, I would tell you, but I was never like that. But I would never make up a story like that and go on a podcast and lie about it.